The conference hall was suffocating in its silence. Cameras clicked impatiently, flashes bursting like restless lightning. Rows of journalists filled the room, pens poised, microphones extended, waiting for the president of the country to speak. But he wasn't speaking. He stood at the podium, hands trembling against the polished wood, eyes vacant, as though the words had been stripped from his soul. Behind him, banners displayed the nation's crest, ironed and flawless. To his left, advisors exchanged nervous glances, one of them whispering into an earpiece, desperate to keep control of the spectacle unraveling before the world. But the man at the center, President Jonathan Keller, wasn't hearing them. He wasn't seeing the crowd. He was somewhere else entirely, inside the shadowed memory of his late wife. Just 12 days earlier, she had collapsed at home, her breath slipping away before the paramedics could arrive. She had been his anchor, the only one who had believed in his humanity behind the political armor. Now she was gone, and the emptiness she left had cracked him open in front of the nation. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His lips quivered, his chest heaved, but the speech, carefully crafted, rehearsed for weeks, vanished like smoke in wind. The silence deepened. Journalists began to murmur. Cameras zoomed in. His failure was no longer private grief. It was a national spectacle. And then, from the back of the room, a soft sound broke through, the squeak of sneakers on the marble floor. Heads turned. The massive double doors hadn't been fully closed, and now a boy slipped through, about 12 years old, clutching a stack of notebooks against his chest. He didn't belong here. His shirt was too big, his pants too short, his hair still damp from a hurried morning. Yet he walked with a mix of fear and defiance, as though he had stepped into a place forbidden but necessary. "Michael!" a woman's voice hissed from behind. She rushed in after him, wearing a simple blue uniform and carrying a tray hastily set aside. It was Anna, one of the cleaning staff, who doubled as a part-time helper in the press wing. She froze when she saw the entire hall staring at her son. The boy stopped halfway down the aisle. He looked at the president, standing frozen, suffocating in grief. For reasons he couldn't explain, not even to himself, he spoke. "Sir," Michael's voice rang through the silence, untrained but steady. Do you need help?" The press room erupted. Murmurs, gasps. Some laughed nervously, others frowned in disbelief. A child had interrupted the president of the nation at his lowest moment, but President Keller blinked. For the first time in 12 days, his eyes truly focused. He looked at the boy, really looked. There was something in Michael's face, a raw, unpolished sincerity, untouched by politics, untouched by the cruelty of the media. The president's throat tightened. The boy reminded him of his own son, or rather, the son he had never gotten to raise. His wife's pregnancy had ended in tragedy years ago, a loss that had nearly shattered him then. And now, standing before him, was a boy about the same age his son would have been, asking if he needed help. Anna's cheeks burned with humiliation. "I'm so sorry, Mr. President," she whispered, tugging Michael back by the arm. "He doesn't understand." But Keller raised his hand. His voice was hoarse, breaking but audible. "Let him stay." The journalists leaned forward. Advisors stiffened. Anna froze, torn between obedience and fear of losing her job. But Michael stood taller, his heart pounding. The president turned back to the podium, the speech still blank in his mind. Then, slowly, he lowered the papers in his hand. His next words weren't part of any script. They came from somewhere deeper. "My wife," he began, voice shaking. "She used to tell me that real strength is knowing when you need help. Maybe she was right. Maybe today, I do need help." Gasps spread across the hall. Some journalists raised their cameras higher, realizing history was unfolding unscripted. And standing there, still clutching his notebooks, Michael took a hesitant step closer. His mother whispered frantically, "Michael, please." But the boy couldn't stop. Something told him this moment wasn't just about the president. It was about him too. And as their eyes locked, the grieving leader, and the son of the woman who cleaned the very floors beneath his feet. The air in the hall shifted. Something fragile and unexpected had begun. For a long, suspended second, neither the president nor the boy moved. The cameras caught every flicker in their faces, the disbelief, the hesitation, the fragile thread of something unspoken binding them together in the center of that suffocating hall. The advisors shifted uneasily. One of them, a thin man in a tailored grey suit, leaned toward the podium, whispering urgently, "Mr. President, let us escort them out before this becomes a—" Keller silenced him with a sharp glance. For years, Jonathan Keller had relied on advisors, pollsters, and speechwriters to carry him through moments of uncertainty. But today, surrounded by the press like circling wolves, it wasn't any of them who steadied him. It was a boy he had never met. "Michael, is it?" Keller's voice cracked slightly, but it was firm enough to hush the whispers. The boy swallowed. "Yes, sir. And you came here because—" Michael glanced back at his mother, who shook her head frantically. But the boy lifted his chin anyway. "Because you looked like you couldn't breathe, like you were drowning." The words were clumsy, but they landed with a weight that no polished speech could have carried. The journalists scribbled furiously. Lenses zoomed in, capturing every detail, the boy's nervous hands clutching his notebooks, the president's weary eyes softening. Keller exhaled, almost a laugh, but too hollow to carry joy. "Drowning," he repeated. That's about right." Anna's hands trembled as she tried to pull her son back. "Michael, please, that's enough." But the president shook his head again. "No, let him speak." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if the thousands of people beyond the cameras weren't listening. "What would you do, Michael, if you saw someone drowning?" Michael hesitated. He was only 12. His experience with drowning limited to the time he had panicked in the community pool until a lifeguard pulled him out. But he remembered the fear, the desperate clawing for air. "I'd jump in," he said quietly. "Even if I didn't know how to save them, I'd still try." Something inside the president cracked, not the breaking that destroys, but the breaking that lets light in. For months, his life had been smothered by loss and calculation, by speeches and strategies. And now, a child had cut through it with a single truth. You don't need the answers to offer your presence. A ripple of voices stirred the hall. Some journalists shook their heads, muttering about inappropriate theatrics. Others leaned forward eagerly, sensing that the story unfolding was bigger than politics. "Mr. President," one reporter called out, "are you suggesting this child will help you deliver your address?" Keller straightened, feeling the weight of their eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he turned toward Michael and offered the faintest of smiles. "Would you?" Michael's eyes widened. "Me?" Anna nearly fainted. "Sir, with respect, he's just a boy." Keller's gaze softened at her panic. "Just a boy, who saw something no one else did." His voice steadied, resonating through the room. "Sometimes we need that." Michael shifted on his feet, nervous but strangely unafraid. He looked at his mother, then back at the man who carried a nation on his shoulders. "I don't know what to say." "Neither do I," Keller admitted. The words should have been damning, but instead they carried a rare honesty. "So maybe we figure it out together." The silence that followed was electric. The polished rhythms of politics had been broken. Something raw and unrepeatable had taken its place. Keller stepped back from the podium and gestured toward the chair beside him. "Come, stand here." Anna's heart raced, torn between yanking her son away and trusting the surreal gravity pulling him forward. Slowly, with small steps that echoed loudly against the marble floor, Michael climbed the platform and stood beside the president. The cameras exploded with flashes, capturing the image that would headline newspapers by nightfall. Keller bent slightly, his voice low enough for only Michael to hear. "All they want are words. But words mean nothing unless they come from here." He tapped his chest lightly. "So if you were me, what would you say?" Michael bit his lip, staring out at the endless sea of expectant faces. His throat felt dry. But then, almost instinctively, he whispered, "Maybe Maybe you should tell them the truth, that you're hurting, that you miss her. The president closed his eyes. Truth, a word that seemed so dangerous in politics, and yet in that moment, it felt like salvation. He opened his eyes again, steadied by the boy at his side. Facing the crowd, his voice finally carried, "My wife is gone, and without her I am not the same man. Today I was meant to deliver a speech about our future, but all I can think about is the present, and how impossible it feels." The hall froze. Not a pen scratched, not a camera clicked. "And yet," Keller continued, glancing down at Michael, "a boy reminded me just now that drowning doesn't end when someone dives in to help. It ends when you decide to breathe again. Maybe today is my first breath." The press room erupted with flashes and voices, but amid the storm, Keller stood taller than he had in weeks, the boy at his side like an anchor he never knew he needed. And Michael, heart pounding, realized he had just changed the course of something far bigger than himself. By nightfall, the photograph was everywhere. The president, standing at the podium, his shoulders heavy with grief. And beside him, not an advisor, not a polished politician, but a boy in an oversized shirt, holding his notebooks, looking both terrified and unyielding. Headlines screamed across screens and newspapers. "Nation's leader breaks down, rescued by cleaner's son." A child at the podium, symbol of hope or proof of collapse. Is the president fit to lead? Some called it authenticity, others called it weakness. But no one ignored it. Inside the walls of the presidential residence that night, silence hung heavy. Jonathan Keller sat alone in his study, the glow of a single lamp outlining his hollowed face. The day's events replayed in his mind, not as political theater, but as something deeply personal. For the first time since his wife's death, he hadn't been entirely alone. A child, a stranger, had thrown him a lifeline. And somehow, it mattered more than anything his advisors had said in weeks. But in another part of the city, the fallout felt very different. Anna paced the narrow kitchen of their apartment, her hands raw from scrubbing floors during the late shift she'd been forced to finish after the conference. Michael sat at the table, homework untouched, staring at the glowing screen of her old phone. Social media feeds flooded with his face. Memes, headlines, cruel comments. Look at him, the president's little puppet. Where's this kid's father? Oh wait, maybe he ran away. They'll chew him up and spit him out, poor kid. Michael turned the phone face down, the knot in his stomach tightening. Anna stopped pacing, her voice cracked. What were you thinking, Michael? Walking into that room, talking to him like that? He looked up, defensive but quiet. He needed someone. I could see it. You don't belong in their world, Anna said, her words sharper than she intended. You think they'll care about you tomorrow? You're just a story to them, a distraction. Michael dropped his eyes. He looked like me, Mom. She froze. What? When I almost drowned in the pool last year, remember? How I couldn't breathe? He looked like that, and nobody else was doing anything, so I... His voice wavered. I couldn't just watch. Anna's anger faltered. She remembered that day all too well, how Michael had thrashed in the water, gasping, his eyes wide with terror, until the lifeguard pulled him out. And she remembered the way he had clung to her afterward, trembling but alive. Her throat tightened. She wanted to protect him, shield him from the ruthless eyes of the world. But how could she blame him for seeing what others ignored? Before she could answer, a knock rattled the apartment door. Two men in dark suits stood outside, their expressions unreadable. Ms. Ramirez? One asked. We're here on behalf of President Keller. He would like to speak with you and your son. Anna's heart skipped. Fear and suspicion tangled inside her. Why? Because, the man said carefully, the president doesn't believe today was an accident. The following afternoon, Anna and Michael were escorted through the guarded gates of the presidential residence. The world outside was chaos. Journalists swarming, cameras flashing, protesters chanting both in support and against the president's display of vulnerability. Inside, the silence felt heavier than marble. Michael's sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor as he followed his mother, his heart pounding. President Keller was waiting in the library. He stood when they entered, his posture formal, but his eyes, they softened the moment they landed on Michael. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice gentler than either expected. Anna crossed her arms, protective. "With respect, Mr. President, I didn't have much of a choice." Keller nodded, accepting the sting in her tone. "Fair enough." He turned to Michael. "I owe you more than I can explain. Yesterday you gave me back my voice, but now it seems we both face consequences." Michael tilted his head. "What do you mean?" The president handed Anna a stack of newspapers. Headlines blared across the front pages. "Child saves president. Symbol or stunt. A nation divided." "My advisors think I made a mistake," Keller admitted. "They say leaning on you made me look weak. They want me to distance myself." Anna's grip tightened on the papers. "Then why are we here?" Keller's gaze didn't leave Michael's. "Because I don't believe it was a mistake, and because I think we met for a reason." Anna stiffened. "A reason?" "Yes." His voice cracked slightly. "I've lost my family. And yesterday, for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. I don't want to let that go." Anna's breath caught. She wanted to reject it, to protect Michael from the dangerous orbit of politics. But Michael's eyes were already shining, drawn toward the man who had seemed to understand his words when no one else ever did. The conflict was clear now. One boy caught between a grieving president who saw him as a lifeline and a mother desperate to shield him from a world that could devour him whole. And as the tension pressed in, Michael whispered the words that would bind them all to what came next. Maybe I'm not supposed to stay out of your world. Maybe I'm supposed to help you." The first week after the press conference was chaos. Every network replayed the footage of Michael stepping beside the president. Pundits debated it endlessly. Authenticity at its finest. A dangerous sign of instability. Exploiting a child for sympathy. The boy, who had spoken only a handful of words, was suddenly at the center of a national storm. At school, Michael could feel the shift. Some kids treated him like a celebrity, begging to sit beside him at lunch, asking for details about the president's life. Others mocked him. One boy hissed as Michael passed, "Hey, puppet boy, gonna write the president's speeches now?" Laughter erupted. Michael swallowed hard and kept walking. He didn't tell his mother. She was already stretched thin, juggling extra shifts to avoid the gnawing fear of losing her job after the spectacle. But Anna noticed the shadows in her son's eyes. And every evening when she saw his face appear on the news, she felt her stomach twist. Inside the presidential residence, Keller faced battles of his own. "Sir, this has gone too far," snapped Robert Hale, his chief advisor. "The opposition is tearing you apart. Poll numbers are dropping. You can't let some janitor's boy become the face of your presidency." The word janitor's boy hit Keller like a slap. His jaw tightened. "His name is Michael, and he reminded this nation that grief doesn't make you weak." Robert threw down a folder of poll data. "No, it makes you unelectable." The tension in the room was suffocating. Keller glanced toward the window, where the faint sound of chanting protesters drifted through the glass. Half of them held signs of support, a president who feels. The other half screamed the opposite, unfit, weak, resign. For the first time in his career, Keller wasn't sure which side would win. Michael and his mother were invited back to the residence a few times that week, but the visits were quiet, hidden from cameras. Keller seemed to crave their company, as though sitting with them around a simple dinner table gave him something more grounding than any cabinet meeting could. One evening, as they ate, Keller asked Michael softly, "Do you regret it? Standing beside me that day?" Michael thought about the laughter at school, the whispers online, the looks of strangers. Then he shook his head. "No, because you looked like you couldn't breathe, and now you do." Anna's fork clattered softly against her plate. "Mr. President, with respect, he's a child. He can't be the one carrying your burden. Keller looked at her, his eyes tired but earnest. I don't want him to carry it. I don't want to carry it alone anymore. Anna's heart clenched. She had buried her own husband 3 years earlier. She knew too well the loneliness Keller described. But she also knew the cost of letting her son step too far into a world of power and wolves. That night, she tucked Michael into bed and whispered, "Promise me, no matter what happens, you'll remember you're just a boy. You don't have to fix him." Michael looked up at her, eyes wide. "But what if I'm the only one who can?" Her breath caught, because deep down, she feared he might be right. The breaking point came 2 days later. A leaked memo hit the press. White House officials concerned about President Keller's dependence on grieving boy. It spread like wildfire, igniting ridicule across talk shows and late-night comedy. By morning, Anna's phone was buzzing with calls from reporters camped outside their apartment. Strangers shouted her name on the street, some offering sympathy, others spitting insults. Michael stood frozen at the window, watching the mob below. His chest tightened. "They hate us, Mom." Anna pulled him close, hiding her own trembling. "They don't hate us. They just don't understand." But the truth pressed in. They were trapped between two worlds, the ruthless machinery of politics and the fragile safety of their small life. That evening, President Keller showed up at their apartment unannounced. No motorcade, no advisors, just him, standing in the dim hallway like a man stripped of all titles. Anna opened the door, startled. "Mr. President?" His voice was raw. "I can't keep this balance. They're turning him into a weapon against me, against us." His eyes glistened. "But I can't walk away from him either." Michael stepped forward, heart pounding. "Then don't." The president looked at him, then at Anna, and in that fragile triangle of grief, hope, and fear, all three understood. The bond they had stumbled into was no longer a single moment. It was a choice, a dangerous one, and the world was waiting to tear it apart. The storm outside showed no signs of calming. By now, the story had divided the nation. Half saw President Keller's bond with Michael as proof of his humanity, the other half as evidence of collapse. Every appearance, every word was dissected. Protesters swarmed the gates of the residence daily. Inside, the three of them sat together in uneasy silence. The television muttered in the background, a news anchor announcing another panel discussion about the boy at the podium. Michael tugged at his sleeves. "They're never going to stop, are they?" Anna muted the TV. "That's why we need to keep our distance, Michael. We can't let them use us anymore." Keller's eyes flickered with pain, but he didn't argue. "Not yet." Instead, he asked, "Michael, why did you say you saw me drowning that day? Why not just say I was nervous or sad?" Michael hesitated. He had never told anyone this part, not even his mother. His voice was low. "Because I know what drowning feels like." Anna turned sharply. "Michael," he kept going, "when Dad died, it was like I couldn't breathe. Everyone said I had to be strong, but I couldn't. I'd sit in my room at night and it felt like I was sinking, like water was filling up my chest. Nobody saw it, not even you, Mom." His eyes glistened. "So when I saw you up there, I knew what it was, because it was me too." The room fell silent. Anna's face crumpled, guilt washing over her. She reached for him, but Michael pulled back, ashamed of the rawness spilling out. Keller's throat tightened. The boy's words pierced him deeper than any headline. He closed his eyes, remembering the sterile hospital room years ago, the white sheets, the monitor's flatline when his wife miscarried their child. He had buried the grief under layers of duty and ambition, but Michael's confession ripped it wide open. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "I lost a son, too." Anna looked up sharply, startled. Keller's eyes brimmed with tears. "We were expecting a boy, but he didn't survive. My wife—" His voice broke, and he pressed his hand against his mouth. "She held my hand and told me we'd try again, that we'd keep living. But after she was gone, all I saw was the empty space where he should have been." The revelation cracked the room open like lightning. Anna, still holding her son, stared at the president as though seeing him for the first time, not as the most powerful man in the country, but as a father broken by loss. Michael whispered, "He'd be my age now, wouldn't he?" Keller nodded, unable to speak. The boy reached across the table and placed his small hand over Keller's. For a moment, the world outside, the protests, the headlines, the politics, faded. It was just three grieving souls, their scars unexpectedly aligned. Anna's voice wavered. "Do you see why I'm afraid, Mr. President? You've lost everything once already, and my son, he's all I have left. If this world chews him up, I won't survive it." Keller met her gaze, his expression raw and unguarded. "And if I push him away after he saved me, what does that make me?" His voice cracked. "I don't know how to do this, Anna, but I know I can't go back to the silence I was drowning in before he walked into that room." Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks. For the first time, she saw the impossible bind they were in. Protecting Michael meant severing something that felt almost sacred, but letting him stay meant exposing him to a storm that could destroy them all. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the weight of the choice hanging in the air. Michael's voice, soft but steady, broke the silence. "Maybe we don't have to choose. Maybe we just tell the truth, all of it, together." Both adults turned toward him. His face was pale, but his eyes carried a quiet fire. "They're already talking about us anyway, making up stories. Why don't we just show them who we really are?" Anna shook her head. "It's not that simple, Michael. The truth can be twisted." But Keller leaned forward, his expression shifting with something close to hope. "Or it can set us free." The room felt heavier than ever, but beneath the weight there was a spark, a fragile, reckless possibility that maybe, just maybe, the way forward wasn't through silence or distance, but through courage. And in that moment, all three of them knew. Something big was coming. The nation held its breath. The presidential press office had announced a live address, not from the Oval Office, not with a teleprompter, but from the same hall where everything had unraveled weeks earlier. The very stage where Jonathan Keller had stood silent, drowning until a boy broke through the silence. Rumors flew. Was he resigning? Would he ignore the boy? Would this be his last stand? By late afternoon, the hall was overflowing. Reporters crammed into every seat, cameras lined the aisles, networks broadcast the anticipation worldwide. The atmosphere was feverish, a mix of cynicism, hunger, and hope. Behind the closed doors, Keller stood with Anna and Michael. His tie was crooked, his hands shaking despite hours of preparation. Anna's voice was tight. "Mr. President, it's not too late to do this without him." Keller shook his head. "It was too late the moment he walked into that room. We started this together. We end it the same way." Michael's palms were sweaty, but his voice was steady. "I'm not scared." Anna looked at her son, her chest aching. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe this wouldn't scar him forever. But the storm outside was merciless, and once they stepped through those doors, there would be no undoing it. The doors opened. The roar of voices, the blinding flashes, it all crashed over them at once. Keller walked to the podium. Michael stood at his side. Anna lingered a step behind, torn between dread and pride. The room fell silent as Keller gripped the podium, his voice rough at first but clear. "3 weeks ago I failed to speak to you. I stood here drowning in grief, unable to breathe, and then a boy, who should never have been in this room, reminded me of something I had forgotten, that asking for help is not weakness. It is survival." Cameras clicked furiously. Journalists leaned forward. Keller placed a hand gently on Michael's shoulder. "This is Michael. His mother works here, keeping these halls clean while the rest of us make our speeches. And yet, on that day, it wasn't an advisor or a senator who reached me. It was him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The honesty was disarming, no spin, no filter. "I've been told I should distance myself, that leaning on a child shows weakness. But let me tell you what weakness really is. Pretending we have all the answers when our hearts are breaking. Pretending we are invincible while the people we love slip away. His voice cracked, raw and unscripted. I lost my wife. I lost a son I never got to hold. And I almost lost myself in the silence that followed. But when Michael stepped beside me, I realized I hadn't lost everything. Because grief only wins when we stop reaching for each other. The room was so quiet it seemed the cameras themselves were holding their breath. Anna blinked back tears, her heart pounding. She had feared this moment, but now she saw something she hadn't expected. Strength in vulnerability. Michael glanced at her, then turned toward the crowd. His voice trembled, but it carried. My dad died 3 years ago. I know what it's like to feel like you're sinking. That day, I saw the president sinking too. So I tried to help. That's all. The simplicity of his words cut sharper than any speechwriter could craft. A reporter jumped to his feet. Mr. President, what do you say to those who claim this is exploitation? Keller's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Anna stepped forward. The microphones caught her voice, firm but breaking. I'm his mother. Do you think I would let my son stand here if this were exploitation? He's not being used, he's being heard. And maybe if more leaders listen to the children who live with what we ignore, the grief, the fear, the silence, this country would be better for it. The hall erupted, some clapped, some shouted, questions flew like arrows, but above the noise, something shifted. The narrative had cracked open. Keller raised his hand, steady now. We are not here today to spin a story. We are here to tell the truth. That grief is not weakness, that help can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to someone we least expect. His words rang out like a bell, unpolished but unshakable. For a heartbeat, the room held still. Then the applause came, hesitant at first, then rising, filling the hall like a tide. Not unanimous, not universal, but undeniable. Keller looked down at Michael, then at Anna. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like they had chosen how to face it, together. And as the cameras captured the image of the president with the boy and his mother at his side, the nation saw not weakness, but something it hadn't seen in a long time. Something real. The days that followed the live address were quieter, in a strange way. The news cycle churned, of course. Pundits debated endlessly, social media exploded, and political opponents sharpened their knives. But something had shifted. Keller's candidness, Michael's courage, and Anna's unexpected voice had created a narrative that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be spun or silenced. Inside the residence, the three of them sat in the library, sunlight spilling across the polished wood floors. The room smelled faintly of old books and the faint trace of coffee from the president's morning routine. Michael had returned to school, but the world followed him in subtle ways. Nods of recognition, quiet respect, sometimes whispered conversations he could overhear in hallways. He walked a little taller now, carrying the weight of his actions without being crushed by it. Anna watched him from the sofa, heart still racing at the memory of that day. She had feared the world would destroy him, and yet, somehow, he had found his own strength within it. Keller leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled over his chest. I thought I was helping him, but it seems he helped me even more. Anna smiled softly, though her eyes glistened. You found something in each other you both needed, but don't forget, he's still a child. He needs both of you. The president nodded. And I intend to be here, not as a figurehead, not as a politician, but as someone who finally knows what it means to stand together. Michael, seated between them, felt a surge of calm he hadn't known before. The storm outside would always exist. Politics was relentless. The world was unforgiving. But inside these walls, and in this fragile triangle, he had found something rare. Belonging, trust, and the courage to keep breathing. A soft chime interrupted the quiet. A notification on Anna's phone. Another news article, another headline, but this time framed differently. President Keller and boy teach nation about courage and loss. Michael leaned over to read it aloud. Anna chuckled softly. See? Some people understood after all. Keller reached across the table, resting his hand over Michael's. Some people, yes, but more importantly, we understood, and that's what matters. The three of them sat in silence, not uncomfortable, but filled with a sense of completion. Not finality, but the quiet satisfaction of having faced a storm and survived it together. Outside, the city moved on. Protesters marched, reporters wrote, politics churned. But within the walls of the residence there was stillness, warmth, and a new kind of power. The power of truth, connection, and shared humanity. Weeks later, Michael's school assigned a project, Describe Someone Who Has Changed Your Life. He wrote carefully, choosing words that carried the weight of months of grief, fear, and courage. He wrote about a man who had lost his family, a boy who had lost his father, and a mother who had faced her fears every day. He wrote about their bond and how sometimes life's heaviest storms could teach the greatest lessons. When he finished, he showed it to Anna. She read it silently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You've understood it all," she whispered. "Everything we've lived. You've understood it." That night, Michael lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The world outside was chaotic, unpredictable, and often cruel. But he felt for the first time in a long while the kind of certainty that can only come from standing beside someone when the world expects you to falter, and choosing to stand together anyway. Keller, in his residence, looked out over the city from the balcony. The wind stirred his hair, carrying the distant echoes of sirens, voices, and life itself. He thought of his wife, of the child he had lost, and of Michael, the boy who had reminded him how to breathe, and he whispered into the night, a vow to himself and the child beside him, "We'll survive, together." Below, in the streets, life surged forward, unpredictable, relentless, unstoppable. But inside, three hearts had found rhythm, one that no headline could destroy, one that no critic could diminish. And as Michael finally drifted to sleep, his last thought before the darkness took him was simple, profound, and unwavering. I belong, and for the first time so does he. Outside, the city moved on, but inside a bond had been forged, unbreakable, authentic, and eternal.